Hi everyone, welcome back to the All Inclusive podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Katy Talikowska, Chief Executive Officer of the Valuable 500. We discussed how the Valuable 500 has rallied over 500 companies to commit to disability inclusion, the inspiration and vision behind the movement created by Caroline Casey, and the key strategies these companies are using to effectively include people with disabilities. You'll learn about the early challenges, real-world success stories, the role of corporations in DEI, the importance of global collaboration, and how you can get involved to make a difference. As always, before jumping into the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, and follow on your favourite podcast platform so that you never miss an episode. That being said, let's jump in. Hi, Katy.
Hi, Natasha. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited for this conversation.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's kick things off. Let's go straight into it. The Valuable 500 has made significant impact by rallying companies to really commit to disability inclusion. So I think the burning question is, how did it all begin? What was the inspiration?
So the Valuable 500 is the brainchild of our founder, Dr. Caroline Casey, a self-proclaimed dangerous dreamer, hustler, entrepreneur, and disability activist. And she's registered legally blind. And if you go back to 2018, when very rightly organisations were properly focusing on diversity and inclusion and equity, Caroline's observation was that whilst, rightly, people were looking at gender, race, sexual orientation, organisations weren't really focused on disability, which, as we know, affects 1 in 5 of the global population. It's intersectional. And of course, disability is a group, a community, call it what you will, that any of us can join at any time through illness, through age, or through accident. So I think Caroline's mission in the first instance, and this was the sort of the inception of the Valuable 500, was to get CEOs to put disability inclusion on the board agenda. And in the first instance, just making sure that it was a topic and an area of focus. So I met, and this is an important sort of anecdote, I met Caroline in 2018 after she very famously had joined One Young World in Bogota in Colombia. And Caroline hadn't got a, let's say, more formal invite, but entrepreneur, activist, hustler, dangerous dreamer as she is, she decided to ride a horse from Cartagena to Bogota to the One Young World conference. And depending on who you believe, the horse either went into the conference center or she tethered it outside. But it was effectively, she went in to create attention and create buzz. And it was a call to action to CEOs to basically say, who will stand with me shoulder to shoulder to start properly focusing on disability inclusion. And at the time, she got the support of Paul Pullman, who was the CEO of Unilever at the time, and Jeff Dodds, who was the COO of Virgin Media. So when I met Caroline, the One Young World event had just happened, and she had the support of these 2 phenomenal business people. And as a result of that, the World Economic Forum had given her a main stage slot at Davos in January of 2019, which is when the Valuable 500 was truly born. At the time, it was called #Valuable. Caroline hadn't set her sights on having 500 CEOs sign up to end disability exclusion in business, and that's what the Valuable 500 pertains to. But I met Caroline and I was working in advertising and marketing, and I wanted to put my hat in the ring to help. And I had a very supportive CEO at the time at my advertising agency at BBDO, and we created a pro bono awareness campaign. And it was really from that launch at Davos in 2019, over the next sort of 2 and a bit years, that phase 1 of the Valuable 500 was getting those 500 CEOs to commit. And now, as I talk to you today, Natasha, we're partway through phase 2, which is really, in the nicest possible way, getting the CEOs to be true to that commitment and really take tangible action and be accountable for the initiatives and endeavours. So that's a bit of a snapshot of the history and where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. It's really inspiring. I think with such a collective force, so much change can happen. And so Could you just highlight some of the significant changes that the Valuable 500 has been able to facilitate through the work that you have been doing so far?
Yes, of course. Thank you. And I think one thing I would say before I get into the meat of the question is, by virtue of us being a global organization, and we're the second largest global business partnership in the world after UN Global Compact. So what that means in real terms is that our companies represent 23 million employees, give or take. We work across 61 different industry sectors, and we have representation across 41 countries. So what's really important for the work that we do is we have a truly global perspective across regions, across geographies, across cultures, and also across industries. So anything we do, any of the actions and initiatives that we take, we can cross-pollinate, we can learn from each other, we can learn from our successes and also our failures, which is equally important. So I think specifically in terms of the key actions that we've been able to do, and everything really has been in service of our strategy, where we have very intentionally, because we feel we shouldn't sort of bore the ocean, we've got 3 key areas of focus, and that's focusing on inclusive leadership, inclusive reporting, and inclusive representation. I can come on to what that means in a bit. But against those 3 areas of strategic focus, we launched at Davos in January 2023 a white paper on inclusive reporting that was developed in partnership with what we call 2 of our iconic companies. So that was Allianz and the London Stock Exchange Group. And out of that reporting white paper, we agreed on what we refer to as 5 standardized KPIs that we ask all our companies to adopt. Because what's really important if we're going to drive system change, and specifically around this area of inclusive reporting, is we need data. And we need to get our companies to start to measure the progress that they are making. Because if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And if you're not managing it, then you haven't got that sense of improvement. So we have 5 KPIs, and we ask all our companies to adopt them. So that's the implementation of ERG, so that's employee resource groups. Never, never underestimate the importance of giving disabled people within your workforce a voice. We also look at workforce representation reporting. We ask them to put goals and governance in place. We look at training. And another thing that's critically important is making sure that all our companies adopt a KPI of making sure that all their digital assets are accessible. Because again, it may sound obvious, but if you have people with disabilities and they can't access your company website, they can't go onto the HR platforms. Big challenges in terms of recruitment if you're trying to bring in people with disabilities. And again, it sounds really obvious, but you would be surprised the number of organizations that don't have fully accessible recruitment processes. So ERGs, workforce representation, goals, training and digital accessibility, those are our 5 KPIs. We also, I mentioned inclusive leadership. We have a really unique, and I'm biased, but a really brilliant reciprocal mentoring program called Generation Valuable. And that's where we match disabled employees who are the mentees with C-suite leadership mentors. And we're actually just recruiting. We did a pilot last year with 67 of our companies, and we're relaunching it in September of this year. And we run a 6-month program. And that's really critical because the objective, as perhaps the name Generation Valuable would suggest, is to make sure that the clear pathway to promotion and getting into those all-important leadership roles is available for people with disabilities. And we've had some fantastic feedback and insights because perhaps unsurprisingly, our C-suite mentors who don't self-identify as living with a disability, matched with the mentees who are disabled, they are learning as much as the mentees because they are getting this intimate insight into what it is like to be a person with a disability in their organization, in the organization that they run and lead. And that's really been illuminating for them. And what's been brilliant is the cultural shift that has happened, because we talk a lot about the importance of initiatives and processes and practice, and all those things are really important. But if the culture isn't right, people often talk about culture, eating strategy for lunch, breakfast, dinner, I can't remember which meal time it is, but the culture is critical, and that comes down from the top. So Generation Valuable as our reciprocal mentoring program is a really important initiative that our companies have adopted. So that's fantastic.
I think it's an amazing tool to be able to do that reverse mentoring. A number of leaders that I've spoken to on the podcast have mentioned them doing something very similar in their organisations as well. But what I wanted to hear from you, how was the process on like the sign up process to get leaders, to encourage leaders to participate? Because whilst the reverse mentoring, it has all the benefits and it's known, I feel like it's known quite a lot that it is going to be beneficial, but there is always some reluctancy for leaders to participate. So how was that process in getting everyone on board?
So I have to say, in the first instance, when we piloted it, and maybe that's because it was a pilot, we only targeted 100 of our companies, so a fifth of our companies, and we were able to get 67 of them to sign up.
Oh, great.
Now, I suppose, perhaps at the risk of being greedy, I can come back and report back once we've officially, well, as I said, we've relaunched. We've now set ourselves a target of all 500. So that in and of itself will be interesting, but we are confident and hopeful, given the learnings that we've been able to disseminate and share. Hopefully that process won't be too tricky. Interestingly, we actually found it harder to get the mentees to sign up. And I think the reason for that, and again, that's inextricably linked, I think, with the point I was making about culture. Having the right culture to mean that a person with a disability, and I suppose specifically someone with an invisible disability, and when you think that approximately 80% of disabilities are invisible, and therefore for some individuals, they are able to mask, they don't feel comfortable sharing, they feel that they will be seen as other in a bad way or less than. So what's really critical, and everything is linked to culture and leadership and all those points that I've made, having the right environment for all employees to feel that they can bring their whole self to work without fear of reprisal or feeling alienated or held back in any way is so critical. So I think for us, actually, the challenge has been more with the mentees, because perhaps with the organizations, despite their commitment, despite their investment in training programs and everything, if the culture doesn't quite feel right, then an individual who does have the ability to perhaps mask or hide their disability, they haven't wanted to come forward to be part of the program, because that would also mean, in one fell swoop, also self-identifying, and perhaps they haven't done that. So there is no doubt that there are challenges for recruitment, but overall we are seeing a positive improvement and trajectory. And I really hope, because we're running 3 consecutive 6-month cohorts, for us, I think it will be really interesting to measure and see the level of recruitment and perhaps the ease of recruitment for cohorts 2 and 3, after within an organization we're able to share that case study and that positive story of people coming forward. But it's a really good question, because I'd love to get to a place where programs like Generation Valuable just aren't needed, but that is really critical as well, because if you get a C-suite mentor volunteering, and Natasha, just as a quick anecdote, I'm not at liberty to say who, but what was amazing is we did have within one organization the C-suite mentor who had not previously self-identified as living with a disability. After the program, and actually it was through his niece who had said, Uncle, I think you should go and get yourself diagnosed, because I think you could be, neurodivergent. And previously, maybe it was a generational thing, maybe again, it was fear of judgment. He wasn't really sure and he hadn't done that, but it was through going through the program as a mentor that gave him the confidence to be diagnosed and then speak freely and openly about it, with that real sense of strength and empowerment, and perhaps an understanding that it was the fact that he sees the world differently as a neurodivergent leader that perhaps led him to that position and allowed him to be brilliant within the organization, in spite of the fact that he hadn't self-identified, because of the unique, diverse, interesting business perspective he could bring to that company. So there's lots of different learnings and leanings, but as I said, it isn't easy, it isn't straightforward, but we have seen some real positive progress, and in terms of the recruitment that we've got for the relaunch of the program, it's looking really healthy.
Oh, great. That's amazing. And what a powerful story as well to go back to and try and see what adjustments or improvements can be made to the program to ensure that those sorts of success stories are possible
Yeah.
for more leaders. So I think on the note of that and some of the innovative things that you guys have been doing over at Valuable 500, what are some of the most effective strategies you've seen in order to ensure that an organisation's culture is inclusive for people with disabilities?
So I think to answer this one, I would again go back to, and I can give some examples, but I suppose the sort of the golden thread between these examples is really organizations, again, leaning into the importance of data, not just to get data for data's sake, but to give you a starting point, I suppose, and to give you that visibility and that sense of ownership and accountability of this is where we are now, and therefore we can put the right cultural changes in place, the right initiatives in order to improve. So if I give an example, Sky is a really interesting example. Sky is one of our iconics again. Sky did a big survey in terms of workforce representation, and they actually found that within their workforce, they had 10% disability representation, which isn't bad. It's probably not globally representative, given it sits around 16 to 20%, depending on various studies. But it wasn't particularly low in and of itself, which was great, but they didn't stop there. They then dug a little bit deeper and actually saw that percentage point was really skewed across different factions of their business, and it wasn't uniform and it wasn't representative. So really low in some, but slightly higher in the other, which was skewing it. So then they got really granular and looked at the different departments, looked at the different sort of services within the bigger sort of holistic, organization, and looked at really specific and tailored training programs. They went really, really big again on pushing the importance of ERGs, lots of workshops and lots of bespoke, detailed initiatives, rather than just sort of sitting on their laurels and go, okay, we've got our data point and we'll continue with perhaps our one size fits all approach. We will be more unique and we will be more sort of granular in details. And then what they did is they continued to do data dips every 6 months. So again, some organizations can do it and go, right, we'll revisit in 5 years. But they were really intentional about checking in constantly and regularly so they could course correct and they could iterate. And after a 2-year period, they had seen that it had gone up to 12%, but what was really critical was that it was representative across the entire organization. So that showed that really sort of intentional and nuanced, I would say sophisticated approach, once they'd got that data point, was really good. I would also call out Procter & Gamble. So Procter & Gamble initiated a cross-industry initiative called the Advertising Alliance, which is a push for accessible advertising. Again, a lot of organizations can be quite intentional in terms of making sure their consumer-facing advertising has authentic and accurate portrayals of people with disabilities within the communications, but they don't always make sure that the advertising that they are producing is fully accessible to everyone. So they're perhaps focusing just on the representation piece, but without making sure the assets can actually be viewed and consumed and heard by everybody. So Procter & Gamble started that, and they have an initiative that in the first instance, they're rolling out across Europe to ensure that all of their advertising across all consumer touchpoints is fully accessible by 2025, which is brilliant. And I would also probably mention as a last example, Microsoft. Microsoft makes sure that all their accessibility training is mandatory for everyone, irrespective and regardless of their ability needs and their accessibility needs. And I think that's so critical because, again, for people with disabilities, again, it helps with that cultural shift. It's not about I am different, I am special, and therefore this is the training for me. It is a mandatory to make sure everyone feels included. And again, it's educational, it's inclusive, it's innovative, it's all good things. So I think, again, not everybody likes the word mandatory, perhaps use the word universal training, but just making sure that it is for everyone rather than sort of doing silo training. So I would cite Microsoft in terms of their universal accessibility training as well.
Oh, fantastic. And just to loop back, I think what you were talking with Procter and Gamble, the reporting aspect and the frequency for them as well. Um, I know reporting is one of the pillars and at Valuable 500. So, what would you recommend? Like, how often should organisations really be looking at their reporting and reporting on where they are at and where they are on in their journey? Because we know that these sorts of changes can take some time to implement when in especially depending on the size of an organization. But what would you say is kind of a general rule on that?
Well, as a minimum, it has to be annually. I think it's really important that companies publicly disclose their data in their annual reports. It has to be baked in to their annual reporting, into their investor dialogue. Some organizations even bake it into to performance-related bonuses. And from my perspective, that is okay, because as long as the job gets done and there is that incentive. So I think as a minimum, it should be annually. But I think the more sophisticated organizations will at least do a quick data dip on a quarterly basis. And perhaps after a year or so, you don't need to do it with that level of frequency. But I think in the first instance, just to maximize your opportunity to learn, I think is really critical. Because again, the thing I would say to companies is, firstly, don't be afraid to measure your data. People can talk about dirty data, but I don't think there is such a thing as bad data. Bad data is only when you've got no data. Because to be frank, whether or not you're coming in at 1% or 20%, at least you know where you are. And going back to the point I was making, then you can put the strategies in place to make sure you grow. And I don't think companies should be afraid or to, look, the reality is all our companies, they've all made a brilliant commitment, but they are all, every single one of them, on different stages of their disability inclusion journey. And that is okay. No one has the answers. No one has got everything right yet, but you've got to start. So I think do take that first data dip. But if you get a sense that it isn't where it should be, then you do have a responsibility once you've started to measure as regularly as your company structure, your budgets, whatever it may be, allow. But I do think in the first instance, the more frequently, the better, because that's when you can learn, you can course correct, and you can iterate, because the journey is an iterative one. You can't just sort of, measure it one day and 12 months later have done nothing and expect it to have gone up. I mean, that isn't going to happen. But I would say as an absolute minimum, it should be annually, because again, I think there is a real necessity for companies to publicly disclose their disability data. And as I said, it is okay if it's not yet where you want it to be, because I don't think there is any company that would say it's job done or where it is, but you've got to go out and you've got to have those metrics in place. And I think you should do it a minimum of once a year.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think a lot of organisations are reluctant sometimes to share the data or to take a look behind the curtain because they're afraid to what's going to be behind there. But actually, just the simple act and the courage of doing that goes so far. And
Yeah.
I think once you know exactly what you're dealing with, I think anybody can. I don't think anyone can argue that it's not a good thing that you're checking what your kind of representation, where your organization is at when it comes to disability inclusion, and that if
Yeah.
you have intentions to change that, why would anyone think anything badly of that, you know?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Switching gears just slightly a little bit, going towards the opposite, what would you say is kind of one of the most significant barriers to disability inclusion in this world today?
So it's a very pertinent question. And I think sadly we are beginning to see a bit of a, don't know what the correct terminology is, a bit of a change, a bit of a backlash. And I'm afraid it's starting in the US. And it's probably not appropriate for me to get sort of too political, but because of certain things going on and the small matter of an election, there are some challenges there. And when we talk to a lot of our companies who are headquartered in the US, there is a nervousness, budgets are being slashed within the space of diversity, inclusion and equity. And so that is absolutely across the board. And that is a really worrying trend. Anecdotally, one of our companies said that if 2-3 years ago he was trying to get 10,000 new $100,000 signed off for disability inclusion initiatives based on the various sort of stage gates. It was relatively complicated, but not too complicated. Now, for $10,000, he has to go through more levels of approval.
Wow.
And so there is definitely a worrying trend coming from North America, I'm afraid. So I hope we can mitigate against that. All our companies that we work with, they are passionately fighting against that. But I think it is worth noting that that is something that's happening because, you know, when the Valuable 500 started, so again, sort of going back 5-6 years, we had to, in the first instance, make the business case for disability inclusion. And we believe passionately that what's right for society is what is right for business. You know, where business goes, society will sort of follow.
Yeah.
And that was why we focused, and we still continue to focus exclusively on the private and the corporate sector, because, you know, you can do in a boardroom, a decision can be made literally in a moment. You know, C-suite leaders can make these decisions overnight versus what, you know, it may take governments years to do. So we used to have to make the case, the business case. Then we started to see a really positive trend where companies were, if there was anyone who was questioning the case that was being made of, if you don't do this, if you don't lean into disability inclusion, this is the risk to our business. We will lose brand share, we will lose brand equity, we will be, to use an expression, we will be cancelled. Consumers increasingly want to buy into brands with these, with these values. There is that is leveling off a little bit. There is a bit more of a trend. So there is certainly sort of a geopolitical thing that I think we're facing into. But again, ever the optimist, you know, given, and I don't throw around these statistics to sort of show off, but given we work with now actually 529 companies, and actually when you put that into fiscal terms, that's a combined market cap of $23 trillion. Now, if we can really harness, and this is incumbent upon us at the Valuable 500 and our fabulous companies and our directory members, who are our global disability experts, if we can really harness what I call radical collaboration and the power of the collective through our way of doing things, which is what we call synchronized collective action. So that's all our companies addressing the same problem at the same time in the same way. Now, I think that is going to really drive system change, and that is the way we operate. So there is no doubt that I think we're facing into slightly tougher times ahead, but I'm fiercely proud of the commitment of our companies. And if we can be true to our way of working and learn from each other. So again, going back to the previous question, the point of different stages of you know, sort of progress and evolution on the disability inclusion journey, but at least everybody knowing where they are.
Yeah.
We can have that rising tide philosophy where we learn from each other, we share best practice across geographies, across sectors. So I think, you know, as I say, ever the optimist, it isn't going to be the easiest of times, but I feel we are match fit, and we've got a great strategy, real passion and commitment from our companies, fabulous expertise and knowledge from our disability business community globally. So if we can really work together through our synchronized collective action, then hopefully we can, in some small way, rally and fight against the slightly concerning headwinds that we are seeing.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it's absolutely inspiring, incredible, amazing. All the positive things, all the positive words that I can think of.
Thank you.
But yeah, it is so true. And I think people forget that collective, that global collaboration is really what is going to help us move the dial in all aspects of inclusion, and especially with disability inclusion. And with more organisations joining Valuable 500, it will only be bigger, better, and more impactful. So I do hope that all the leaders listening into this conversation today go to your C-suite, tell them all about the fantastic work that Valuable 500 are doing, because they're here to help and assist your company and your organisation. Because I think we all want the same thing. We all want to make sure that everybody that walks through our doors feels like they belong in that organisation and that they are valued. And that shouldn't only be kind of excluded to those that have got are physically able people. It should be everybody. So thank you so much, Katy, for sharing all of your insights and the strategies and all the great things that Valuable 500 are up to. Before you do leave us, though, I do want to get a little bit more detail on what is ahead for Valuable 500, because I know you did touch on it already in the conversation. You're into phase 2, but what
Yeah.
are the next big steps? What do you foresee over the next few years?
Perfect. And Natasha, I have to compliment you. What you just said at the end was absolutely perfect and beautiful. So thank you. So in terms of next steps, I spoke about our way of doing things in this sort of radical collaboration and the power of the collective, synchronized collective action. So we are working towards what we believe will be the world's first accountability summit for disability inclusion, which we are calling SYNC with a Y, referencing synchronized collective action, SYNC 25. So Sync 25 for us will mark the start of a decade of accountability and action for our 500 plus companies. So our ambition is to run this accountability summit, our Sync as it were, every 2 years, starting on the 3rd of December. So that's International Day of Persons with Disability. So 3rd of December, 2025 in Tokyo, we are hosting Sync 25. I can't quite yet tell you who we're hosting it with. I'm so sorry, it's under embargo. But we have a phenomenal local company who are helping us host, along with our strategic partners, the Nippon Foundation. So the Valuable 500 would not be here without the funding and strategic support of the Nippon Foundation, who helped sort of put us on this path of action. So I would say that sort of Japan is perhaps our sort of spiritual home, hence us hosting it in Tokyo. So we have 17, I think it's 17 months and a few days, and not that I'm counting, before we get to this accountability summit. And really, I mentioned our strategy and our areas of focus around inclusive reporting, inclusive leadership, and inclusive representation. Day one, 3rd of December, and we'll do, it's going to be a 2-day conference. Day one is reporting back. So I've spoken before about the importance of accountability and data reporting. We will be reporting back the consolidated, combined progress across all our companies against those 3 areas of focus. And then day 2 is setting out our stall and saying, right, what are the next 3 synchronized collective actions we are calling upon our companies to take? Because sadly, it's not going to be job done. We are confident that we will have made measurable progress. And to be clear, we will still be asking our companies to continue against leadership, reporting, and representation, but there will be more to do. So it will be a more focused group, as I say, setting out our stall, looking to the future against what those 3 next synchronized collective actions will be. But from now until December, everything is very much about sticking to that strategy, supporting our companies with the expertise and knowledge of our disability experts to help get us to sync and show up, celebrate successes, understand some failures and challenges, because you know the adage, you can learn more from your failures than you can from your successes. You don't want too many failures,
Yeah.
but any bumps in the road, any moments where we've had to course correct, we will also be spotlighting those, because that's how we'll learn, and that's how, as I said, we'll cross-pollinate and be able to sort of come together as a group to drive change.
Oh, absolutely incredible. Well, Katie, I wish you all the best
Thank
in that
you.
future event. I'm super excited. I know it's going to be successful, and I know it's going to be absolutely amazing. So kudos to you. And once again, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. For our listeners, if they want to learn a little bit more about you and Valuable 500, what's the best way they can do that?
Best way is through our website. We have various sort of click-through links to get in touch with us. So it's the valuable 500 numerically .com. But you will see all the contact details there. But please do get in touch. We've got lots to share, and we've got lots to collectively learn and do.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I will put a link down below this episode for everyone who is listening, so they can find out a little bit more about the work that you guys are doing and get in touch to hopefully join.
Thank you so much for having me.